that creep shaming has come to Star Trek. And it's going to be that. And I'm also going to discuss how the original series was actually much more progressive than later series. As the series went on, it became actually less progressive. Now, the young man who goes by the name Just Some Guy, he is actually going to give in to this creep shame himself. So he's going to try and complain about what's going on while adding fuel to the fire. Now, it's basically about LeVar Burton, who found that his character, Gordi LaForge, never got laid. And that is very important to these guys. Let's hear this.
Comments in a Rolling Stone interview. The interview was about Burton's career, and he was asked about Star Trek Next Generation, and specifically if he changed anything about Geordi. His response? Yeah, he'd get laid. I can literally hear that line in his voice. I mean, Geordi had the bluest balls of all of Star Trek. You'd think it was Blue Balls Bashir. Nah, it's Geordi. Every effort he made was either ruined, misunderstood, or made up to later find out that the real deal not only didn't like him, but was also married.
Now, when he's talking about blue balls, like if you're talking about the characters getting laid, period, there was always all kinds of Star Trek characters that never had any love interest. Sulu from the original series had no love interest, zero. Well, the other ones hardly got any. So what's it? I know it's not his character, LaForge. LeVar Burton should be angry with is the fact that they didn't do anything with his character, Gordi LaForge. It shouldn't be that he got laid. He didn't get laid. It should be the fact that there was all this potential that was squandered. And you can compare it with later characters like Barclay. Barclay was a nerdy character who started off as in a single episode and through the course of the series actually became popular. He succeeded. He had a story arc. He had a character arc. He improved. Okay. Whereas LaForge never did. So that's what LeVar Burton should be angry about, right? Now, of course, when they talk about blue balls, it may be that the LaForge character actually put effort into getting love interest and Sulu didn't. So that might be the difference.
That the real deal not only didn't like him, but was also married. Every story has its archetypes, and it's usual to have one who's the unrequited lover. That's Gordi LaForge. He was a nerd. He wasn't so weird that he was unlikable, just a little awkward. It seems like
the problem with that being a nerd trope is that the original series, guess what? They had Nurse Chapel, who had a thing for Mr. Spock. It was unrequited love as well. So it really doesn't have anything to do with being a nerd. Really, it shouldn't.
Like the writers did this because they had no one else to do it to until they created Barclay. Even then, Geordi was still the love-struck punching bag. It would have been nice for him to get some, but in fairness, most of the cast never got any either. The writers just decided to make Geordi the likable guy who always strikes out, or as LeVar Burton put it, the writers were racist. Quote,
yeah, he's a likable guy who always strikes out, which is true, which is what I saw. Then why are you, Just Some Guy, and LeVar Burton himself calling this character a creep? So we'll get right to that.
Then he followed it up with, quote, I was criticizing the lack of awareness on the writer's part, unconscious bias, around the sex life of the character, and how that creative choice led to the character behaving like a miscreant sex offender in his stalking of Leah Brahms' character.
So LeVar Burton now considers his character, Gordi LaForge, not a nice guy who just struck out. He sees him as a miscreant, so he's a criminal, and he's a sex offender. And he was stalking this character, Leah Brahms. I believe I know what they're talking about. I won't get into it too much because I am going by memory. But if I'm right, he was interested in this Leah Brahms character, and he didn't know she was married. And he was focused on her. He wasn't stalking her. He was focused on her. So for him to say this, basically, LeVar Burton was saying that this guy, his character, Gordi LaForge, was a creep, meaning he was a guy who didn't realize that he didn't deserve intimacy. He didn't gain status. He was annoyed. All these guys, they're supposed to just know that they're unappealing and never try. So this is very telling because LaVar Burton is an old man now. So he didn't have that. It's not just a newer generation. Older men never had that, and now they do. So this is showing that there's a real poisoning of the minds of men now.
Again, your statement to Rolling Stone, quote, whether they are aware of it or not, those white men who wrote the show had an unconscious bias that was on display to me and the other people of color. Their blind spot is revealed in the fact that a black man was never successful at one of the basic and most, and then you went off into your tangent.
Yeah, so he's trying to make it about race to hide the fact that he's embarrassed. This guy, LaVar Burton, I believe he's married, so he is being validated by a woman, but he's upset that a fictional character isn't being validated by a female character. This is how bad it's gotten. That's why I think, incel is an insulting term. It's same as creep, but it's almost like every guy is becoming an incel in that they're adopting the behavior, the mindset, I should say, of it being so important that people believe they get laid. And these are older men who are getting laid.
You were not talking about nerds. You were talking about race. Why are you lying? We can reach your words. They're right there. Look, you did that. No one else was talking about race. You brought it up. So Bounded Into Comics is right to call you out. Now, if you wanted to talk about how creepy Jordy comes across, that'd have been fine. Like you say when Rolling Stone asked you whether Jordy was an incel, and you talk about the creepy things he did, quote, that's part of the problem.
Before we go any further, you just heard it. Just some guy said, if you want to talk about how creepy he was, that's fine. It's not fine to me. Gordi LaForge wasn't a creep. He was just a guy putting himself out there and looking for love. Just like just some guy himself, right? Just some guy. You're well named. You're one of the few YouTubers that gave yourself a decent name. You are just some guy, and you want to get laid, and you are no doubt a nerd who's unappealing to the opposite sex. By your own admission, you either never try to get laid or you're a creep. That's the only way you can see this. And all these guys, this is what makes why I don't like about TradCons. Bounding Into Comics is a TradCon, publication, and just some guys at TradCon himself, and they always think, me on a personal level, I'm never a creep. I'm just a guy trying to get laid. But every other guy is a creep. He doesn't know his place, right?
In their attempts to be cute, they inadvertently create an aspect of Jordy's character that is very uncomfortable. Totally valid criticism, and it has nothing to do with his or your race. It looks
totally valid criticism. They made my character look like a loser, but he's not a loser. He's been downgraded from just a guy who strikes out to a criminal, according to both these guys. LaVar Burton himself and this just some guy fellow now see men who hit on girls as criminals. Just some guy, maybe guys like you belong in jail because I'm sure you're hitting on the girls.
Looks like the writers were playing on a trope about nerdy guys, and they made the likable nerd look creepy and ran with it. It's not because of an unconscious bias against black people, but probably one against nerds, if there was a bias there at all. I don't understand.
Again, it can't really be about nerds, though. Like I said, Nurse Chapel from the original series was, Google-eyed over Spock, and they never went anywhere. And she's not considered a nerd. She's not a nerd, and she's not considered creepy. Okay, so now I'm going to compare the old with the newer versions. I know they're not new, they're old themselves, and show you that there's been not a progression, but a regression just by looking at the characters. Now, if you look at Kirk and the boys, again, it went by status, not race. The original series was all about free love. And as you can see, Kirk, he was basically the James Bond in space. He was getting all the girls. He was the highest status man. And so he was getting all the girls, right? And next in line was the second in command. Mr. Spock had a few times where he had love interest. And that's amazing considering Mr. Spock is basically asexual. So again, he was next in line, right? McCoy got a couple. He's third in line and in rank, and he got one or two situations like that, right? And as you go down the rank, the less they happen. Now, notice too that it doesn't matter about the ladies. What was it here? Michelle Nichols, her character, Uhura, she wasn't getting hit on by a lot. That has nothing to do with race. It doesn't matter for the women. It doesn't matter for the actresses. The actresses don't care that their parts that they played were getting laid, because women don't care about men's sex, and they don't care. They're not validated by men's sex, so they don't care anyway. But the point is, Uhura is important in that she and Kirk kissed, and it was the very first interracial kiss on television ever. That was a huge step forward. That was as progressive as they could get, right? So that's how that show progressed. Fourth in line, I'll just get back to this. Scotty had one episode in the entire series where he had a love interest. It was just one episode. And he's fourth in the line. He's after that. So he's white as he can be. So it just goes to show you that they weren't getting, the show wasn't about that. It was, Kirk was the guy who got all the ladies, right? And if you look at the newer generations of the series, it was getting less and less for everybody. Sulu is a great character, which I thought they could have done more on. They never did one episode that was surrounded particularly by him. He was a very interesting character. He actually sat in the captain's chair once. So it just goes to show, and I really like Sulu. He had no love interest at all, right? And of course, we'll end off with Chekhov. This guy tried to get with the ladies, but he almost always failed. And for some reason, he's not going to be targeted. He's not targeted. It's not because of race again. I think because he didn't have the unrequited love. He would just try and fail. So he's the typical loser, right? And to go on about how progressive the original series was, Nurse Chapel, the actress playing her, remember the pilot series had her in it, not as Nurse Chapel, but as second in command. She was where Spock was. And I guarantee you, she would have been a sex symbol if the series had stayed that way, with the long flowing dark hair and the cool demeanor and being in charge. I guarantee it. So the actress, Majel Beret, I don't know if I'm getting her name right. If that part had been secured, she would have been much more famous. But what happened is the executives back then, so Roddenberry, people couldn't take the idea of a woman in command. And they couldn't deal with Spock, like the idea of an alien being something other than the other to defeat or to deal with. So Roddenberry had to make a compromise. He said he decided to keep Spock and demote Majel here to a lesser part. And I am curious, it would be nice to have an alternate universe where he did the reverse and Spock was gone and she stayed in second command, see how it worked out. But that's how progressive it was. He made the executives uncomfortable. And again, Nurse Chapel will never be called a creep, even though she pursued Mr. Spock, knowing that she would never get with him. He didn't feel that way about her. They never got together in the entire series. If you look at the newer season, or season, listen to me, series, which is as old as the hills now, there was actually a lot of regression. I mean, just from the background, like if you look at the original series, there was mood lighting and mood music. You know, Spock had his own theme song where whenever they talked about Vulcans, you would hear the song in the background, boom, 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 boom. I know I'm getting it wrong, but the point is there was real atmosphere. And if you looked at these new series, just think of how gray, battleship gray the walls are. Everything was sterile. They got rid of not only the lighting, but even the wood paneling doors that the old one had. And everything's sterile. And this is a ship that's supposed to have housing civilians as along with the military personnel. And of course, you can go on about this, that, the other thing. But what I want to get the point is there's two things I want to point out. One is that guys who did get characters, I should say, like Worf, who had love interest, got married. How is that progressive? The old series was free love, like the idea of probably hitching up, it was probably old school. But this series, which came much later, matter of fact, Worf, this is Deep Space Nine, when he got hitched, they're suggesting that marriage is going to be around 300 years from now. And you can see the state of marriage now, how it's just terrible in every way. So why are they going back to the 1950s, two people bond and say we're not going to be around any other, or have sex with anyone else, or deal with anyone else? It's very tradcon, right? Of course, there's another married character. Meany plays, what was it? I'm trying to remember his name, the Chief O'Brien, Miles O'Brien. He got married and he was part of a married couple. So again, it's this tradcon version that's supposed to be progressive. They were supposed to get more progressive, but they weren't. They actually regressed. No one really cared that the female characters got laid. Denise Crosby, Tasha Yar's maybe a bad example. Whoopi Goldberg, what was her big? What was her name here? Guinan or whatever. She had no love interest. Nobody cares. Whoopi Goldberg doesn't care. But I want to get to the most important one as far as I'm concerned. Let's see. Yes. Q. Q is an extra dimensional being. And in the series after that, after Deep Space Nine, what is it, Voyager, he's a male Q that impregnate a female Q, and they made a baby. That makes no sense. Q here is not a human being. He only took on human form to interact with the Starship crew. He can take on any form he likes. He has no gender. And so there shouldn't be any male and female in the Q continuum. Everyone's able to change their shape, take multi-forms, do things like even become a part of the wall. They have no gender. So why did a series that's fourth in line regressing extra dimensional being into a binary? And this is why I know what the LGBT is. They pretend that there's no non-binary, but they always make a binary when it counts, when they feel they want Q. If Q shows up as a man, he's giving all the problems of being a male, right? He and the female Q, they act like a human male and a female human, right? So there's no progression whatsoever. It's a regression. This character could have been 100% asexual, joked about the idea of having sex. He's immortal, so there's no point in having sex anyway. And reproduction, it's a non-issue. So what it is they can't ever get away from it. I want to come back to Barclay. Dwight Schultz plays Barclay. This character is not called an incel. He's not called a creep, even though I don't think he really got together with anyone. Why? Again, because they made the character a likable character who gained status. He was at the bottom at the first, and he progresses as a character. So people see this Barclay in a positive light. Again, it is about status, not race. And LaVar Burton should know that. So there's that. The tidbit, this is kind of tertiary, but Denise Crosby, who played Tasha Yar, I heard that she wasn't particularly interested in that character. She wanted the Marina Sirtis character. What's her name? I forget her name. What's her name? Counselor Troy. She wanted the Counselor Troy part. Why? Because the ladies, they're not interested in being the shield maiden, the warrior goddess. They're not. They want to be the beautiful, non-combatant, love interest, in this case, manipulator. That's what they really want. It just kind of a side to everything I'm saying, but I think it's important. It's important because it says that there hasn't been any progression. There's only been regression because men and women haven't changed an iota about what they enjoy and what motivates them. That's a fact. That's a fact. It's only regressed. It's only regressed because the original series came around in the era of free love when people thought things were going to change. And these newer series came in after when people realized, no, we don't want free love. We don't want to change. And if anything, you're seeing that things are getting worse for men. That men like LaVar Burton didn't give a shit about his character getting laid at the time or even 10 years after. It's only now. This is an old man who, like I said, he is already married. He already has a wife. It's so bad now that these guys are concerned that they're never in a position that people think, oh, you couldn't ever get laid. And you can't blame the younger generation on this, can you? Because he's part of the older generation. So there's a real mental illness going on with men now that the girls have discarded us. Men, I think, are becoming psychologically, mentally ill. And you can see it in the self-loathing of using terms like creep and incel from, characters in the past that were simply before just nice guys that didn't get any. Well, you know something? I refuse personally to become a part of that illness. I'm going to make myself resistant to it and say it was never important that Gordi LaForge ever got laid. What was important is that Gordi LaForge should have been a character that had story and arc and exciting episodes centered around him. That's what I had to say about that.